welcome. This is my new setup. So this is not going to be a standard ADHD video, just FYI, but I'm someone who loves these kind of videos. So hopefully you do too. And that's why I wanted to kind of give you a run over of my new YouTube setup. Now, FYI, we're going to get really into the weeds on this because I don't know, like I want to show it off. I'm really excited about it and I hope you will be too. So let's dive in. This, I think, is, I don't know, iteration 2.5 or maybe 3, depending on how you look at it. In my old house, I had one dedicated setup in the basement for my YouTube videos. And then I also had a half-assed setup in my office on the upstairs. Now, that worked fine, I guess, except that one, I don't like basements. I mean, like, if they're cold, they're dank, there's always some sort of creepy crawler around, and I think I'm just perpetually traumatized. In my old house, you could also hear water running from the shower or the toilets, and you could hear when my sump kicked on or my furnace kicked on. Hey guys, Brame here, and I know a lot of you are right in the middle of starting your... In the videos, it was really hard to edit that all out. I did not successfully do it many times. So consequently, it was hard for me to get the motivation to go down there and film. But it was nice for that, like whenever I did get that motivation, I had a dedicated setup. Like I said in my previous video about lowering the friction, that made it really easy. So I wouldn't have to set things up or break them down. It was just all ready to go. So when we moved to this new house, I had to break that down and figure out what I wanted to do in terms of a YouTube setup. For a while, I was just doing it over in a sitting area that's in my office, and it was fine. Like, I like that area, but I don't know, it felt a bit too like FDR fireside chat or something. Maybe it's a body language thing or something, but I wasn't comfortable there, and to set up lights there would have made things really cumbersome because that's also where my dog will sleep when I'm down here, and I'll just trip on it. I know I will. I'll trip on the tripods. So it, like, the lighting was bad, the vibe was bad. It didn't work. So I knew that it had to be time to take this seriously and figure out what it was that I really wanted my YouTube setup to be. So this is it. This is actually, I guess, dual purpose, because this setup will also be for my crafting channel. The, I guess, impetus, is that the right word, of redoing all of this was that I was doing a lot of resin crafting. It's one of my many side businesses, but did not have a good enough space for it. Like, I had an okay space, but it was too cramped for all the things that I wanted to do. So I decided that it was really time to expand that in a better way. And if I did expand it, then maybe I could turn it into my YouTube studio too, because I film all of my crafting. So you see like where I'm going with this. But more specifically, there were some needs that needed to be filled. One, it had to be modular, meaning that I needed to be able to quickly put things away, which is difficult when you have ADHD, so that I could do this kind of video versus a crafting video. I also wanted to make sure that I was able to have it clean, because let's face it, like if I had a bunch of resin stuff here drying, then it would just, like, I'd never get anything filmed because it would just be too much clutter. So I really needed something that I could quickly essentially flip so that I could do crafting videos or these videos. One other need that I had for this is that I needed it to be a permanent setup that was not cluttery. That's not a word, but it's a word right now. The thought of having tripods everywhere, like that even in my head, it felt really just uncomfortable and something that I really did not want to have. I felt like it would just look really messy. So I was going to have to find a way to make everything in a permanent solution above me. But that brought its own challenges. I was nervous about the idea of having a permanent setup pretty much completely exposed. In my old house in the basement, nobody's going in the basement. But here, this is a split level house, so it's the bottom floor, but it's also like a public floor, if you want. Like, you know, we could have people sleep in this room or things like that. So I got really nervous about thinking about being that exposed, which is silly because we have people come here, I don't know, once or twice a year, and I'm going to make myself nervous about 2 weekends a year when the rest of the year I need this set up. You know, like, so it became getting over a mental block too that I still have a little bit of apprehension about, but it's fine. It is what it is. My in-laws aren't here right now. Nobody's here in our house. My husband knows I do this, so it's, you know, irrational mental block pushed away. So let me give you a tour. First, and I will, I'll leave all the links in the description. However, there's a lot of links. I'm just gonna give you the heads up. If you want more information on other parts of this, you should probably check out my crafting studio video, because that will go into more of like the storage and stuff like that. First, this table. This table is a 4-foot wide table by, I think, 16 inches or something like that. And consequently, it's not a very wide table, which is fine. Like, that fit my space really well. I was actually planning on having my aquariums at my back as sort of, you know, like decor, but just based on the ceilings here, it wasn't gonna work out. So consequently, I'm facing, I think, west, and have a window behind me and some of my plants. Also some crafting projects that have gone by the wayside, shall we say, for now. It's only been a year. But I really liked this table because not only did it have shelving on it, it came with 2 chairs, and it was a clean aesthetic. I also really liked that this table has a shelf directly under where I'm sitting. Consequently, like, I can't sit all the way up to it because my knees don't fit then, but it's fine. Like, that works out well because I wanted to add a tabletop on top of it. Now, I got this at Home Depot, and this tabletop is, one side is whiteboard and the other side is blackboard. I don't think I'm ever going to use the blackboard, to be honest. It might be useful for overhead crafting shots, but for talking to you, it's whiteboard all the way. Now, the boards at Home Depot are super thin, so I actually got 2 and glued them together. It's to the point where, like, it's sturdy enough I can sit, like, you know, put my weight on it, but it's still light enough that I can lift this up and move it for when I need to do my crafting. So that way, again, this solves that modular problem of being able to film all the videos that I need to film in one space. Now let's get into the hardware. And this is gonna be the really nitty-gritty in the weeds part. So strap in. So like I said, I decided to do an overhead setup for a couple of reasons. One, like, I wanted everything off of the floor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with videography, but there's lights that need to be here, there's camera, so consequently there's a lot of tripods on the floor, and it doesn't really work out that well in a small setup. So that's why I wanted to go overhead. Also, this half of my office, the only outlet available, and not even available, the only outlet installed is above me. I don't know why. I wasn't here when it was built. I can't understand it. I just work here. So it actually ended up being really useful for this situation, except for one part, and we'll get into that in a second. So when I was going through my options, I saw that, like, there are really expensive rigs, and shout out to B&H Photo. Those guys there were super helpful and really patient with me on what I was trying to accomplish. I did not use them because of my budget. If I had the money, I would have used one of their setups. Instead, I ended up using black pipe above me, and not even black pipe at Home Depot. You can get this whole setup that I made at Home Depot, but I did not opt for that, mainly because I found a slightly cheaper option, a slightly cheaper and more convenient, I should say, option on Amazon. I used a black pole curtain rod that looks like iron pipe. It was expandable, so I didn't have to worry about cutting metal pipe, and it all came together. So, like, it saved me so much time fussing at Home Depot. There is one drawback to this pole, and just to let you know, if you put too many things on it, it can still kind of spin. So you have to be kind of cognizant. If I had used regular iron pipe, I wouldn't have that problem. This, like, it's fine. You know, like it does the job. Since the only power source is above me, I ended up using a power adapter that fits into both outlets, gives me 8 plugs and a couple of USB ports. That has helped so much. That way I can hook everything up right here without having to worry about extension cords and more extension cords and tripping, because I will trip, I know it. That way it's all right there. Consequently, I do have wires right here that I can't really do anything about. It's an eyesore more than anything, but it's, in the grand scheme of things, like if that's the worst thing I have to deal with, so be it. I also added an additional USB power adapter since most of my stuff now runs on USB instead of 110 volt plugs, which is convenient, except that when you're used to plugs instead of USB ports, you just it's an extra step you have to think about. Now let's talk cameras. I have 2 cameras right now. I have my Sony ZV-1 that I'm talking to you on, and I have a super cheap 48 megapixel camera above me. I use that for overhead shots. You can use your phone if you want to replicate this setup, but there's a couple of reasons I got a dedicated camera for my overhead shots. One, since I do crafting, it gets really messy and I didn't want to sacrifice my good camera or my phone. And 2, I just didn't want to think about it. It's lowering the friction. If it's already there set up for me, all I have to do is turn it on. I don't have to worry about like finagling it and getting all of this stuff. It's there. So if you are thinking like, Megan, you've spent so much money, kinda, but since I'm someone that had needs for a dedicated camera, I went and I got a cheap one. It doesn't have to be fancy. It did need to have an HDMI port, which I'll talk about in a second, and I needed to have zoom. Because originally I got basically a GoPro knockoff. It was the Akaso EK7000 camera. And that one solved a lot of problems for me. One, it had plastic casing over it, so it could handle resin or paint or anything like that getting on it. 2, it was super cheap. And 3, it came with a lot of mounts so that I was able to kind of make this really modular. But there were also a couple of problems I had with it. One, it would not zoom. It did not have a zoom function, which is kind of okay, except that it wasn't. It was really difficult for me to get a good shot of what I was writing. 2, the plastic case doesn't work when you have an HDMI cord coming out of it. There's no, like it's supposed to be waterproof, so it's completely tightly sealed. There's no way you can put an HDMI plug through it. And 3, when you plugged it into an HDMI port and a monitor, it won't show up. And that was just a deal breaker for me because I really needed to see what my camera was showing, because if I'm crafting, that's usually a one and done thing. I can't go back and redo it. And that camera just would not allow me to do that. That's why I got my cheap camera instead. Maybe someday I'll upgrade it. I don't really see the need right now. For now, it's fine. My Sony ZV-1, I have hooked up with a dummy battery so that it constantly runs on power rather than batteries. I talk a lot and I do a lot of videos at the same time. And to work with the Sony ZV-1, I have a small rig Bluetooth remote that I have permanently Velcroed over the side here. I say it works about 80% of the time. Sometimes I forget to turn it off and then the battery dies, but otherwise it's really helpful. Now, all of my cameras feed through an HDMI splitter into my FREEl World 7-inch monitor, which I have right in front of me, looking at it this way. I need to be able to see what you see and make sure that I'm in the shot, that everything's getting captured the way that I want it to, and that the lighting works. If you're someone who wants to do YouTube videos seriously, I would recommend getting some kind of monitor. I think that has been one of the most quintessential investments, and it's not even an investment. I think it was like under $100. It is so worth it. For the ZV-1, I use a couple of different tripods, and all of my tripods have the Ulanzi Fast Claw setup. It has made my life so much easier, and I absolutely recommend it if you're someone who wants to do hard shots like this and shots on the go, and you will need to like flip out your camera really quickly. That system has saved me so much time, and I have it on any tripod possible, which brings me to the tripods. I use a Zome Q111 tripod for this setup. I also have my Ulanzi, MT52 octopus tripod, and I have a whole video showing how much I love it over here. You may notice that I don't use the octopus arms on it because I'm usually just on the go with it. So I don't really need additional lightings, but I have the arms over there if I need them. For my overhead camera, I have Neewer Magic Arm and Clamp. I didn't buy that specifically for this. I don't even remember why I bought it. That's just classic ADHD, isn't it? But when I found it in my stash of photography stuff, I was quite happy. And it has been a really perfect setup. It's not too long, so it makes sure that my overhead camera isn't in this shot, and it's sturdy, and I don't ever worry about it falling down. Now, originally, my plan was to use what's called a magic arm for this camera too, and just have it hang down. It just did not work the way that I needed it to. I couldn't find one long enough that would kind of snake down. And honestly, whenever I would try to finagle it, that's what would make this pole shift. It just, so yeah, I'm fine with just one tripod. That makes my life way easier and is a good enough compromise for me. Now let's talk lights. I spent a lot of time learning about lighting, way more than I did before. I originally had a studio light set up in my old YouTube studio, but again, I didn't want the tripods everywhere. And the thought of having like these giant studio lights right in my face was kind of off-putting to me, like from a sensory perspective. So I decided to go smaller and kind of save those for whatever. So for lighting, I've got a couple of lights. My key light, which is the one that shines this way, is a Viltrox L116T with a DC plug. They usually come with just batteries, and again, I want everything hardwired because it's a permanent setup. I don't want to deal with batteries if I don't have to, so I got a plug for it. If you're curious, it's at 5600 Kelvin and at about 30%. If you see a couple of videos that I filmed before this, and I will link to one right here, I had it at 100% because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. No, just don't do that. My key light is actually hanging from a repurposed small rig overhead tabletop mount. This is what I used on my old crafting table to get the overhead shots easily, and it's a really useful tool to have. I would recommend it if you're going to do a lot of overhead shots and you don't want to have a permanent setup like this. My fill light, which is over here, is a no-name LED light. I'll link to one that's similar. It has slide-in filters, and I have it on a daylight filter setting, and it is the thing that is lighting right here. For my fill light back here, I'm using a small rig super clamps connected right to my bookcase. Next is this light right here, this kind of pink light. That's actually my grow light for my plants. So that's only on sometimes. So if I'm filming when it's on, then it's on. Here and here, I have RGB stick lights, and they're 20 inches. I got them on AliExpress because they were way cheaper on there than Amazon. And one of the best features about them is that they're handheld, which means they have batteries, which means I can charge them. Again, that way I don't have to have wires tripping me all over the place. Finally, I have an overhead light that I use for crafting shots or for writing, and it's the Ulanzi U60. It's an RGB light like my stick lights, but I just keep it on a daylight temperature at a pretty low setting, just to make sure that whatever I need the overhead camera to get, it gets well. Finally, the last part of miscellaneous stuff, I've installed a USB port hub over here for batteries or charging. For most of my craft tools that are power tools now also run on USB, so that's there. I have it set up with zip ties just because I'm like testing to make sure that this is where I want it to be. When I figure out the more permanent setup, then I'll use Velcro. That is connected to my overhead plug via a USB extension cable. And in terms of microphones, I don't use shotgun mics or boom mics. I don't know why. I just prefer my DJI mics because they're really portable, they work well, they're really idiot proof, and yeah, it was an investment that I'm glad I made. I have two of them, one here and then one in a backup just in case. Finally, one thing I added that is studio-ish but more room specific, I guess, is I added a thick velvet blackout curtain with a ceiling track to it because this room has no door to it, and I wanted to have that one audio muffled for upstairs And 2, just if my husband saw that was closed, then I'm filming. Although he can come in. I like him, so it's fine if he comes talk to me, but more that I just wanted the sound muffled. One of the things about my anxiety is that I don't want all of this to be traveling throughout the house, so I hope that it's muffling the sound even just a little bit. And I got the ceiling track so that I could get as much of that space covered with curtain as possible. And that's it. That was a lot, right? I feel like that was probably a lot of information, but this is my new setup and I like it so far. I hope you do too. Now, if you want to know about my workflow for my YouTube videos, you're gonna have to check out this video, because that one would go into all of the apps that I use to ensure that I get you the videos that I want to get you on time. I will see you in that video.